The counterattack launched by Kyiv 2 weeks ago is gaining momentum. Fierce clashes are taking place in the eastern and southern axes of Ukraine. The Ukrainian armed forces are flying their official flags here, liberating the Russian-occupied territories. Russian official Vladimir Rogov wrote in a telegram that the village of Vytsky and the disputed Zaporizhia region in southern Ukraine are now under Ukrainian control. Piatigorsk will be the second settlement taken by Ukrainian forces along the front in Zaporizhia after the Kyiv army announced that it had captured Lobkov southeast of the district capital. A fierce cat-and-mouse fight escalates along the Ukrainian river as Kyiv troops liberate villages. Violence in Kherson worsened with the start of Ukraine's much-lauded spring offensive. From the streets near the beach to Dnipro, shimmering can be seen between the buildings on the waterfront. A large area of water separates the warriors into two control areas. On the west bank of the Dnipro River is the city of Kherson, which was liberated from Russian occupation on November 11 last year. On the opposite bank, Russian troops are withdrawing across the river just to take up positions there. They have been bombarding Kherson from these positions every day since then. The riverbanks are also within range of snipers. What is clear is that the struggle for the islands, swamps, and gulfs of the Dnipro Delta is very different from the fierce battles on the Eastern Front. Here, the warriors move on the ribs with powerful engines. In this deadly game of cat and mouse, both sides launch frequent raids from boats, which are visible to drones and vulnerable to gunfire, artillery, and mines. For example, in April, the Ukrainian armed forces achieved critical success in a raid. Images from Russian military bloggers provided the first reliable geolocated image of Ukrainian positions south of the river. According to conflict analysts, Ukrainian troops managed to cross the Dnipro River in the south of the country for the first time since the beginning of the Russian invasion. Crossing the Dnipro is crucial to the Ukrainian military's goal of controlling Crimea, which Moscow annexed 9 years ago. Ukrainian troops aim to advance about 161 kilometers south of the river, at least as far as annexed Crimea. This breakthrough comes just after rumors of a partial withdrawal from Russia's Kherson region. As is known, the Dnipro River has been the front line since the Russian troops withdrew from Kherson in November. The Russian-appointed governor of the Kherson region denied reports that Ukrainian forces were positioned on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River. The governor stressed that the region is completely controlled by the Ukrainian army. In addition, the Russian news agency TASS confirmed that Bakhmut, a small town occupied by the Russians between Zaporizhia and Melitopol, was hit by Ukrainian shells on Tuesday, April 25. Offensive operations in Bakhmut and Dnipro show that Ukraine is operating militarily in the direction of Crimea, as is known. The leader of Kyiv, Zelensky, stated that the war would end with Crimea. For this reason, the Ukrainian armed forces are trying to focus on Crimea by relieving the south of the country. The main focus of conflicts in the south of Ukraine, including the Dnipro River, is the Crimean Peninsula. So what's going on in Crimea lately? 9 waves were registered over the territory of the Republic of Crimea the other day. Sergei Aksyonov, the so-called head of the Russian administration in Crimea, claimed that 3 of the unmanned aerial vehicles were shot down by electronic warfare assets, and 6 unmanned aerial vehicles were shot down by air defense forces. Aksyonov added that a drone exploded in the village of Dokuchayev in the Krasnogvardaysky region, but there was no loss of life. Only the windows of some houses were broken. Especially the city of Sevastopol, which is an important port and a large naval base for Russia's Black Sea Fleet, has witnessed many suspicious Ukrainian attacks. Ukrainian surface drones attack Sevastopol. Sevastopol Governor Mikhail Rozvizhayev stated that the Russian Black Sea Fleet repelled a drone attack on the city. According to Rosrusev, Russian anti-submarine sabotage forces shot down 1 drone, and another allegedly exploded on its own. The so-called governor claimed that the drones were shot down during an external raid, and therefore, no facilities in Sevastopol were damaged. The Russian Telegram channel Astra published photos of broken windows of buildings in Sevastopol. Another drone attack caused a massive fire at a fuel storage facility in Sevastopol. Rozvizhayev stated that 4 fuel tanks were hit in that incident, but no one was injured. It seems that as long as the Ukraine war continues, Crimea will always be at one end of the attacks. Now let's turn our attention to the latest developments on the front lines. The past day, the Ukrainian armed forces launched a large-scale offensive in the Zaporizhia region. According to war correspondents, the level of activity of the Ukrainian troops has increased significantly. There are incessant conflicts in the region where many armored vehicles and military units are used. Ukrainian forces tried to break through the defensive lines, attempting to break into the combat formations of Russia. Tank units were sent to the front to assist the Russian infantry units. According to military analysts, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to push back the Russian troops and take some positions. This appears to be a position pushed forward from where the Ukrainian army plans to continue the offensive. Intense shelling is reported against the Ukrainian army in an attempt to block further progress. In addition, powerful explosions were recorded in various settlements of the Kherson region during the night. These eruptions are reported by local people, especially those living in the southern part of the region. The incoming information is confirmed by video on which a large-scale fire was noticed for several hours. Explosions were heard in the urban-type settlement of Genesis region Rakovo. From there, a column of smoke rises, demonstrating the devastating power of the explosions. So far, no official statement has been made by the authorities. Preliminary data show that the attack on the object was carried out by the armed forces of Ukraine using the Storm Shadow cruise missile. On the other hand, dramatic images showing the destruction of a Russian ammunition depot on the territory of southern Ukraine appeared on the internet. Dense smoke and orange flames are seen in a clip widely circulated on social media and shared by Ukrainian military and regional officials. A spokesperson for the Ukrainian Air Force said in a statement that, according to Ukrainian media, Kiev forces struck a Russian munition storage facility in the Kherson region of southern Ukraine. According to Ukrainian officials, the explosion occurred in the village of Karasin and Rakov near the Russian-controlled port city of Henichesk. According to local media, the commander of the Ukrainian Air Force, the ammunition storage facility was located at the Pozheny railway station near Rakov. While the counterattacks continue, the blowing up of the Russian supply depot makes the Moscow troops very uneasy. The fate of the Russians, who have been struggling with ammunition shortages since the beginning of the war, still continues. Unlike Russia, Ukraine's hand is stronger in terms of ammunition. Kiev's Western allies maintain their support as the counteroffensive continues. The UK is preparing to hand over the Portuguese production takeover R3 to Ukraine. Funding for the transfer of the drone will be provided through the UK's International Fund to support Ukraine. This fund receives support from countries such as Denmark, Iceland, Lithuania, Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, and, of course, the United Kingdom. Thanks to the new unmanned aerial vehicle, the Ukrainian army will be able to conduct long operations of up to 16 hours. In addition, the takeover R3 is capable of vertical takeoff and landing in the optional configuration. The Takeover R3 is a small, long-lasting drone specifically designed to scan large areas in both land and sea missions. It has a payload capacity of up to 4 kilograms and can reach speeds of up to 75 to 90 kilometers per hour. As a result, Ukraine's counterattack is advancing with small but determined steps. Kiev has not yet made a broad operational breakthrough. However, despite these small advances, the Russian army suffered substantial losses. Ukraine's long-awaited operation to reclaim Russian-occupied territories is in full swing. The offensive. Units of the Ukrainian armed forces continue to advance in the direction of Berdyansk as part of their offensive operations. The Ukrainian army launched a massive counteroffensive by reaching a sufficient level of strike force and weakening the Russian infrastructure sufficiently. Ukrainian troops are advancing step by step towards their goals with the offensive they started in this direction. According to the latest information from the front, the defense forces of Ukraine made gains in the offensive operation in the direction of Berdyansk. In particular, they took control of an area up to 3 square kilometers. Kovalev evaluated the results of the counterattack operation of the Ukrainian army in the direction of Berdyansk in the Zaporizhia region. In a live broadcast from the military press center of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Andriy Kovalyev, spokesman of the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, said that in the offensive operation carried out in the Tavria and Donetsk operational regions, the troops of an offensive grouping of the Ukrainian Defense Forces advanced from 500 meters to 1 kilometer in the Berdyansk direction and advanced to 3 square kilometers. In a separate statement from the Ukrainian military, it was reported that Russia forcibly evacuated the Ukrainian people from the region. Civilians living in the Ukrainian port city of Berdyansk, which Russia took control of right after the invasion last year, began to be evacuated before the counterattack of Kiev. Berdyansk, where approximately 100,000 people live, is known as a port city and an important center for Ukraine's export of coal, grain, sunflower seed, oil, iron, and other commodities. The port of Berdyansk is located on the Azov Sea, which opens into the Black Sea. He announced that in the counterattack launched by Ukraine, in the towns and villages close to the front in this port city, the evacuation of especially children accompanied by a family member or a companion was given priority. The report states that those who were evacuated from this port city were placed in accommodation centers in the Zaporizhia region, which is home to Europe's largest nuclear power plant. Earlier reports said that Ukrainian forces recaptured 7 settlements from Russian forces last week. Those settlements included Lobkov, Livny, Novofedorivka, Niskichny, Storagev, Makievka, and Blahardatin. While Russia's large-scale invasion was unfolding in waves few had anticipated, time has shown Ukraine to be a great warrior. The heroic defense of Mariupol even saved the whole of southern Ukraine from being taken over by the Russian occupation forces. In fact, Mariupol liberated the entire south of Ukraine. If Mariupol had not been defended, if the Russians had not been forced to redeploy troops to thwart Ukraine's counterattack, there would have been neither Mykolaiv nor Odessa. Nor Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Alexander Pavlyuk said in a statement that they would join the group and go to Transnistria, and Ukraine's connection with the Black Sea would be completely cut off. In addition, the group of defensive forces in the east, capturing all the combat-ready forces of the enemy, crushed its potential and held it in the east. The Ukrainian army has started to achieve remarkable successes in the last weeks. The attacks on the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia annexed in 2014, have led to critical attacks in the occupied Ukrainian regions, such as more than 50 Russian ammunition depots and artillery fire against command units. On the other hand, the Russians do not have enough personnel and capabilities to protect frontline logistics. This shows that logistics systems have reached the point of exhaustion and that they are fragile. In addition, the Russian army no longer has the personnel, energy, and resources to carry out another major offensive in the attacks against Russia. Each attack on points such as arsenals and command centers caused Russia to pull back its supply points even further. And we can say that the situation has become more and more difficult for Moscow. When the experts look at the points reached in the war, they are of the opinion that by the end of the year, Ukraine can take back the regions occupied by Russia after February 24th, and then the Crimea and Donbass through negotiations in the next 1 to 2 years. In the intense fighting, something emerged that would become clearer in the months that followed. The Russian army is poorly managed, whether it is regular units, conscripts, airborne troops, tank crews, mechanized infantry, artillery units, combat engineers, or logistics. The Russian invaders are weakly motivated, poorly trained, and undersupplied. They have no ammunition, fuel, and rations, and are totally unprepared and inept to carry out the tasks they are asked to complete. The first strong resistance by highly motivated Ukrainian ground forces believing they were fighting for their lives, their families, and the existence of their nation made the Russians pay dearly for their indiscriminate and under-resourced invasion. Despite some initial successes in the south and east of Ukraine, Russia visibly underperformed in almost all areas of its military operation. Not only has Ukraine won most of its military engagements, it is also winning the propaganda and morale battle. The precious commodity half-time has resulted in the development of much better, well-trained, well-equipped armed forces. Ukraine has since used time to prepare its new brigades for the much-anticipated counteroffensive, which it hopes will eventually end the war in its favor. In short, even President Putin saw that time was no longer on his side, at least in the short term. It's not just the leaders in Ukraine and Russia. That time flies. Despite the completely unjustified occupation, many in the West reiterate the commitments of the US and UK, as well as NATO, the European Union, Germany, Poland, and the Baltic states, and others to support Ukraine for as long as possible. It has increased optimism that the counteroffensive now launched will succeed in defending and reclaiming enough territory to please Kiev and bring Putin to the negotiating table. On top of that comes information that Russian troops were killed while retreating from their minefields. According to reports, Russian soldiers are suffering casualties from being detonated in their own minefields in the face of continued Ukrainian attacks. In its daily report, the British Ministry of Defense reported that some units in the Russian army were probably withdrawing in some disorder amid growing reports that Russian casualties were rising as some units were conducting reliable maneuvering defensive operations while others were withdrawing from their own minefields. The Ministry of Defense did not provide further details, but said Ukrainian forces have likely made good progress and have entered the first line of Russian defense. Kiev is careful to be tight-lipped about the ongoing offensive in some areas as Ukraine gains territory. It seems that Russian President Vladimir Putin will realize that he cannot win on the battlefield. The more gains Ukraine gains, the stronger its hand will be at the negotiating table. It's still in the first days of the offensive. We don't know if this will be the turning point of the war, but we see the Ukrainians making progress and reclaiming more land. The quagmire Russia is mired in is pulling Russia deeper and deeper into it day by day. Although the Russian invaders have been in Ukrainian territory for a year, they have not achieved the targeted gains, as these gains were not achieved. They had to withdraw from many regions they occupied. Now it is Ukraine, sir. The Ukrainian army, which is considerably stronger than it was at the beginning of the war, has carried out an operation that shook Moscow. Russia, confused about what to do after this operation, moved to take revenge but could only hit empty fields with the missiles it fired. So what did Ukraine do that Russia suddenly lost control? Let's take a look at the details of this remarkable operation. The Pioneer team works hard to bring you breaking news, critical operations, and diplomatic contacts from local and international media on the Russia-Ukraine war. It sheds light on the Russia-Ukraine war with its news supported by interactive content. You can support the Pioneer team by using the Super Thanks button to continue this intense effort. The Ukrainian army's firepower is increasing day by day, combining its increased combat power with the experience of its soldiers. The Ukrainian army has created an effective force. This effective force is a nightmare for the Russian army. The blows struck against Russian soldiers in the Russian-occupied territories led the Russian army to withdraw from many occupied territories. But the war is not over yet. The Ukrainian army is on the offensive to prevent Russia from returning with the intention of invading again. The war between Ukraine and Russia introduced many new concepts into the war literature. In addition, this war has given a practical demonstration of the development of conventional weapons of war. One of the most important of these weapons of war is drones, which have been especially instrumental in the Ukrainian army's major blow against the Russian army. The Ukrainian army used drones to destroy many armored vehicles of the Russian army. Unmanned aerial vehicles became the actor that shaped the war with their attacks on the Russian army, especially the Turkish-made Bayraktar model. Drones used by the Ukrainian army have gained great popularity. Recently, the Ukrainian army caused a great panic and loss in Russia with a kamikaze drone attack on the Yaisker jet base belonging to the Russian army. The Ukrainian army dealt a heavy blow to 6 Su-34 fighter bombers belonging to the Russian army. But this was the beginning of drone strikes within Russia's borders, and the scandalous news came recently. Bryansk Oblast is located very close to Russia's border with Ukraine. Bryansk is also very close to Moscow, the capital of Russia. Autonomous watchtowers of the Russian army are also located in this region. These watchtowers, which were operating in the region to monitor the Ukrainian border, were destroyed by Ukrainian army drones. It was announced that Kraken, the Special Operations Unit of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, organized the operation. Kraken also published images of the attack on its Telegram channel. Grenadier autonomous observation towers of great importance for Russia. These observation towers have a major role in ensuring Russia's border security. With this operation, Russia is now blind in Bryansk. On the morning of the day of the attack, the governor of Bryansk Oblast announced that Ukrainian sabotage groups had entered the city of Bryansk. However, the information was not taken seriously either by the Russian government or the media, as the governor used too many contradictory statements. At noon, the Russian military issued a statement saying that the border areas were secured. The increasing number of alleged infiltration attempts from the Bryansk region panicked the Russian military. However, the army, which has a cumbersome command functioning, did not organize any operations in the Bryansk region. Russia did not expect Ukrainian troops to cross the Russian border and get so close to Moscow. Obviously, Russia did not consider Ukraine strong enough to carry out this operation. This underestimation cost Russia dearly. Having infiltrated into Russia, the Ukrainian Special Forces Kraken conducted a lengthy reconnaissance operation in the Bryansk Oblast. They tried to find a suitable point from which to launch an operation in line with Ukraine's small but effective offensive strategy. The Grenadier autonomous watchtowers were perfect for this. The Kraken team made its preparations. Kamikaze drones were lifted from suitable location. The goal of the drones was to destroy Russia's watchtowers and take Russia's eyes and hit the bullseye. The drones under the command of the Kraken team hit the watchtowers in the first wave of strikes. The towers were heavily damaged, but the towers were not completely destroyed. The success of the operation depended on their complete destruction. There was a possibility that the Kraken team would be exposed in Bryansk. Taking this possibility into account, the team redirected its drones in the direction of Bryansk. A second drone strike hit the towers in Bryansk Oblast, shattering the watchtowers. The attack caused a great panic in the city. The residents of the Bryansk city, who were shocked by the first explosions, started running around in fear and panic. With the second explosion, the watchtowers were destroyed in front of their eyes. The information that the watchtowers were destroyed caused a great shock in the Kremlin. Russian officials who received the news of the attack lost the color of their bodies with the shock of the news of the attack. How is this happening? Where did the Ukrainian army find the strength and courage? The authorities had many more questions. In addition to the questions, the fact that emerged began to bother the Russian authorities more and more. That reality was this: Russia's borders have now become a common target for the Ukrainian army. The Russian army can no longer protect its borders. The Ukrainian army continues to give Russia nightmares with its unmanned aerial vehicles within the borders of Ukraine. The Ukrainian army, which gave the Russian army a hard time with its unmanned aerial vehicles, continued its operations against targets belonging to the Russian army in Donetsk Oblast this week. Ukrainian drones destroyed a BMP-1 IFV tank belonging to the Russian army in Donetsk Oblast. The images of the tank, which the drone destroyed by dropping 5 bombs from the sky, were shared by the Ukrainian army in another region in eastern Ukraine. A Russian T-72 tank was destroyed with an phone bomb dropped by a Ukrainian drone through the tank's hatch. The Ukrainian army is using unmanned aerial vehicles in most of its operations, establishing a great superiority over Russia. Ukrainian army personnel who are highly skilled in drone piloting easily destroy Russian targets from where they are sitting without approaching Russian targets. Unmanned aerial vehicles. One of the biggest factors that changed the fate of the war have become a nightmare for the Russian army. It is not clear what the Russian army will do after the latest attacks. The situation of Russia, which has suffered heavy wounds, is getting worse.